on the night of August 6th, 1887, less than a mile from where my home now stands and I sit recording this video, nearly an entire family was decimated. Not even the infant daughter was spared. The only survivor, an adult son. This Halloween, we visit the horrendous, bloody axe murders of the Woolfolk family, here on Gaming with Boomers. Welcome to the channel, Boomer family. Tonight we have a true crime Halloween episode full of murder, mystery, and morbid mayhem. So, turn off the lights and settle in with your Halloween candy while we trick or treat for murder. Let's begin. In the early hours of August 6, 1887, 9 members of the Woolfolk family of Bibb County, situated just outside of Macon, Georgia, were hacked to death with a razor-sharp axe while soundly sleeping in their beds. The victims ranged in age from 18 months to 84 years. The 84-year-old being Mrs. Woolfolk's elderly aunt, who had the bad luck of choosing that time frame for a visit. The only surviving member of the household, 27-year-old son Tom Woolfolk, who quickly became the prime suspect. But after 5 sensational trials, had the real culprit been brought to justice and hanged? Perhaps you can play juror and decide. Now, let me introduce you to the Woolfolk family, which incidentally is spelled W-O-O-L-F-O-L-K, but is pronounced Woolfolk, just in case you want to Google the story. Now, Captain Richard Woolfolk was born in 1835 and graduated from the University of Georgia. Upon the outbreak of the American Civil War, Richard Woolfolk was made a captain in Company A of the Ross Battalion in the Confederate Army. Before the war, in 1854, Captain Woolfolk married Susan Moore, and the couple had 3 children before Susan suddenly and sadly passed in 1865, having not really fully recovered from the birth of their last child, Tom. Their children were Florida, known as Flo, born in 1855, Lily, born in 1857, and Thomas, or Tom, born in 1860. Upon Susan's death, Captain Woolfolk married Mattie Howard, a graduate of Monroe Female College in Forsyth, Georgia, just north of Macon, and moved her into the house in Bibb County, where his first wife, Susan, lay freshly in her grave under a nearby tree. Captain Woolfolk and Mattie had 6 children: Richard Jr., born in 1867, Pearl, born in 1870, Annie, born in 1877, Rosebud, born in 1880, Charles, born in 1882, and baby Mattie, born in 1886. Young Tom, the son of Woolfolk and his first wife, Susan, spent his first 7 years living with his mother's relatives up north in Athens, Georgia. He returned to his father and new stepmother in 1867, 2 years after his mother's death. Now, no reason is recorded as to why the boy did not live with his parents and siblings during those 7 years. There's also no record of any of his siblings from either marriage having lived outside of the Woolfolk immediate family home for any period of time while growing up. One wonders if resentment built in young Tom. Now, the crime. Around 2 o'clock in the morning of August 6th, 1887, neighbors were awakened by dogs barking at the home of Captain Woolfolk. Tom Woolfolk, the captain's oldest son, wearing just his socks and underwear, ran to the house of Green Lockett, a black sharecropper who worked on the captain's plantation. Tom was crying, "Get a gun! They're killing Pa!" Lockett refused to go back with him, but sent his son to alert the white families in the area. Soon a crowd of men, both black and white, had amassed at the Lockett shack. Tom told them someone had entered the house and killed his entire family. Tom himself escaped death by climbing out of the window. He did not see who the killer was. The crowd went with him back to the captain's house and watched as Tom went back inside to make sure everyone was dead. No one else would go inside while it was still dark, so they stood there waiting until daybreak. When it was light enough to see, the men entered the house and saw that Tom was correct. The entire Woolfolk family had been murdered. Amid thick pools of blood and spattered brains, 9 bodies lay hacked to death. Tom's father, Richard, age 54, his stepmother, Mattie, aged 41, his half-brother, Richard Franklin Jr., aged 20, his half-sister, Pearl, aged 17, his half-sister, Annie, aged 10, his half-sister, Rosebud, aged 7, his half-brother, Charlie, aged 5, and his half-sister, Mattie, aged 18 months. Also, his stepmother's aunt, Mrs. Temperance West, who was aged 84. Their heads had been smashed by blows from an axe. Some wounds were from the blade and some from the end. This fact led some to believe there were 2 killers. There was one set of bloody footprints made by Tom in his stocking feet. News of the murders spread quickly, and by mid-morning, hundreds of people had gathered around the home of Richard Woolfolk, who had been a leader in the community. That afternoon, a coroner's jury was formed to investigate the crime. Tom, who had since put on pants and a shirt, was asked to strip so that they could see the clothes he'd been wearing. They noticed a bloody handprint on Tom's thigh that he could not explain. Under Tom's bed, someone found his blood-stained undershirt. The jury suggested that Sheriff Westcott take Tom to Macon for further questioning, and they went out the back door. Out front, the crowd had already grown impatient with the wheels of justice, and when they learned Tom had been taken away, a group of men took off after them. Tom arrived in Macon just barely ahead of a mob bent on lynching him. Now at 27, Tom Woolfolk had yet to find his place in the world. He had failed as a farmer and had failed as a merchant. He was married, but his wife left him 3 weeks after the ceremony. He had a reputation for being unstable and eccentric. He was also suspicious and irritable. After his arrest, several people came forward remembering threats Tom had made against his father, and that Tom had claimed he had more right to his father's land than his half-siblings had. If his motive for the murder was to inherit his father's land, then the order of the deaths would be important. If his father died before his stepmother, she would inherit the land, and on her death, it would go to her surviving family. If she died first, Tom would be in line to inherit his father's property. In fact, the property was not worth as much as people thought, because the captain was in bad financial straits and was heavily in debt. Tom Woolfolk was the only person the authorities looked at for the murder, but another name kept popping up. A black vagrant named Jackson DeBose had been arrested on suspicion of being an escaped convict. He began talking in detail about the Woolfolk murders. He claimed he did not participate, but he was there when they happened. He was eventually released when it was learned that he had a reputation for lying about crimes. It was a dangerous game he used to get free room and board at local jails. Now the trials. 5 of them. The morning of December 5th, 1887, there were more spectators trying to get into Tom Woolfolk's trial than there were seats available in the courtroom. Tom Woolfolk's defense was handled by Colonel John C. Rutherford, the former Solicitor General for the Southwestern Court Circuit. He moved for a continuance because a number of his subpoenaed witnesses, including Jackson DeBose, were not present. Judge George W. Guston denied the motion. The prosecution presented all of the circumstantial evidence and testimony of witnesses who had heard Tom Woolfolk threaten his father. The defense tried to admit statements of witnesses who heard others claim they killed the Woolfolks, but because the speakers themselves were not in the courtroom, they were disallowed as hearsay. On December 14, 1887, as prosecutor John L. Hardiman was giving his closing arguments, he had worked up the crowd to such an extent that several spectators began shouting, "Hang him!" Judge Guston was not effective in restoring order. The following day, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. The case was appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court, who considered the shouts of "Hang him!" sufficient cause to overturn the verdict. On March 4th, 1889, Tom Woolfolk was tried again. Rutherford believed his client could not get a fair trial in Bibb County, so moved for a change of venue. Judge Guston denied the motion. On the close of the first day of trial, it was reported that one of the jurors had said he would cause a mistrial before allowing the prisoner to be found not guilty. When Judge Guston learned this, he had little choice but to declare a mistrial. On March 11, 1889, they tried again, but only got to 11 jurors before running out of eligible men to serve. Judge Guston was forced to try again in a new venue. On May 29, 1889, a new trial began in Houston County. This time, several people reported that one of the jurors stated he did not believe in convicting a man on circumstantial evidence. Another expressed doubt about some of the evidence itself. Another mistrial was declared. Tom Woolfolk's fifth and final trial was held on June 8, 1889. This time, the trial went to completion, and again, the verdict was guilty. The verdict was appealed, but was not overturned. While Tom Woolfolk awaited hanging, Jackson DuBose, remember him, the vagrant, was arrested as an accomplice in the Woolfolk murders. On July 5, 1889, DuBose met with Judge Guston, and they talked for an hour or so. The judge dropped the charge of murder entered against DuBose and tried him on a writ of lunacy. He was found guilty and sent to an insane asylum. On October 29, 1890, they took Tom Woolfolk to the gallows in Perry, Georgia, where the atmosphere resembled a circus, with photographers and street vendors hawking souvenirs to the enormous crowd. Tom maintained his innocence to the end, reading this statement to the crowd. I, Thomas G. Woolfolk, realizing the existence of an infinite, wise, and holy God, and so as to meet him, knowing all that I have ever done, and fully understanding that I must stand before the judgment bar of God, and that today, in a few hours, I shall be called into his presence, do solemnly declare my innocence. And I leave as my last declaration that I did not take the life of my father or any member of his family, or have any knowledge of the person or persons who did the murderous deed. Signed, Thomas G. Woolfolk. At 1:31 p.m., they sprung the trap. But the fall did not break his neck, and Tom Woolfolk slowly strangled to death. He was pronounced dead at 2:11 p.m. on October 29, 1890, 3 years, 2 months, and 23 days after his family was viciously murdered in their beds less than a mile from where I now sit. At the start of this video, I posed a rhetorical question. Had the real culprit been brought to justice and hanged? Now, before you answer, consider the following. Shortly after the Woolfolk murders, Simon Cooper, son of London and Luana Cooper, black farm workers who lived nearby, left Bibb County. In 1898, Simon was lynched in Summerville, South Carolina. On his body was found a notebook with the following lines. Tom Woolfolk was mighty slick, but I fixed him. I would have killed him with the rest of the damn family, but he was not at home. Was that a confession from the true culprit? Or perhaps the notebook was a false confession planted on the scapegoat victim of a lynching. And that, Boomer family, is the tragic and bloody true tale of the Woolfolk family. Do you think justice was rendered? Or did Tom Woolfolk hang until he slowly strangled to death for murders he did not, in fact, commit? Let us know in the comments. As always, thank you for being part of our dysfunctional family, and have a safe and scary Halloween. We love you. Bye!